3 or 4 weeks ago, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith implemented a moratorium on wind and solar development in Alberta. It's been highly controversial. And then yesterday, the Alberta Utilities Commission announced some new rules for projects that frankly got people now scratching their head yet once again. Things just seem to go from confusing to more confused. So I'm going to talk to Jorden Dye, who is the acting director of the Business Renewables Centre in Alberta, about, maybe we can get some clarity on what's going on. So welcome to the interview, Jorden.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, I think everybody is familiar with the moratorium. The idea was that there were concerns over the use of agricultural land to put, on which to build wind and solar farms. There were also concerns around reclamation. And what now has the Alberta Utilities Commission announced in terms of its new rules?
Yeah, so I think we have to take one step back to the last announcement from the Alberta Utilities Commission, where they announced that they would be allowing projects to go through the approval process up until that approval stage during the moratorium. And following from that, yesterday, just 2 days ago at 5 o'clock, they released their updated interim information requirements. So what those are new requirements for information projects will have to submit in the approval process. The new requirements are applied to all projects submitting after August 3rd, 2023. However, the big catch there was they said they may apply them to projects already in the pipeline, but they didn't give details on what projects would the new information requirements be applied to.
Okay, one of the points you made in the release is that many of these new requirements are, in fact, have already been addressed in the approval process. And I went to the announcement by the AUC, and I was looking through, reclamation security and land use and viewscapes. And many of them seem very commonsensical. I mean, there's nothing really radical there. Why couldn't these issues have been, if there was concern over them, why couldn't the government or the AUC simply modify its proposal, its process, maybe do some consultation with stakeholders, including the project proponents, and do it that way? I mean, there's nothing in here that screams we need 7 months, a 7-month moratorium to figure this out.
No, I think that's a great question. And it comes down to the process that they've chosen to do this through. I think that when you look at other industries that have faced rapid development, the Alberta government has held regulatory reviews of those industries without pausing development. And then when you look specifically at the renewable energy industry, these requirements come under their Rule 7 for the AUC. And there's been multiple Rule 7 updates, even just over the last couple of years. So they have normal regulatory processes they could work through these issues. And as you said, so while like all of those issues aren't in the information requirements in the current process, they have on occasion, for specific projects asked for some of this information before. So it's not, again, there are valid questions and there are valid concerns coming from rural constituents. It's really about the process that they chose to go down with this unprecedented moratorium.
Yeah, and I should point out, regular energy media readers will know that we published part 2 of the Unethical Oil series a couple of months ago, in June. And it was about the conventional oil and gas production. And we went back and as far as the early 80s, and we had some of the regulator documents. And one of the things that became really clear is that the various oil and gas regulators over the past 40, 50 years, they have processes, and then they have stakeholder groups. It used to be, industry dominated them, but lately it's been broadened to include more stakeholders. But that regulator has a long history of including regular consultations with the industry, project proponents, all of that. It's very clearly understood, and it's just, standard operating procedure. And why, any insights into why that sort of process wasn't considered or wasn't done on, the government didn't choose to go that route with renewables?
Unfortunately, due to the lack of consultation, as noted, leading up to this, we actually don't understand why this process was chosen in this way. I think the government has put forward multiple explanations now at this point for why they went with the moratorium. I think the evidence that they've shown to support those has been soundly, discredited. So we know that the Rural Municipalities Association did not directly ask for a moratorium. We know the AUC and ASO didn't ask for a moratorium. I think that's a question you'd have to ask the government to understand why they chose to go with this. Frankly, it's a choice that goes against every principle of a functioning market. Like even in industries like with major issues where you want to, which I don't think the renewable industry has, that you want to do significant new regulation. There's just certain principles of grandfathering in old projects that were filed in good faith under the previous regulatory system, how you engage with stakeholders to move forward. I mean, there's a scenario in which they would have had a lot more support from the renewable energy industry to have these conversations. But again, they chose to go with a process that creates conflict right from the beginning.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is reclamation security, because this came up, this is, from the earliest days of oil and gas, the Alberta government, and we're going back to the mid 1930s, the Alberta oil and gas, the Alberta government chose to either take little or no security for oil well and facility reclamation. And still today, when it brought in its 2020, it brought in a new framework management system, and then still no reclamation. On the oil sands, there's been a little bit of reclamation security collected, but now all of a sudden there's a big panic to collect reclamation for wind and solar. And was there any reclamation security required under the old process?
So I think we need to stop and make some distinctions between oil and gas and renewable energy here, because on first blush, it sounds like you could just apply an apples to apples comparison. And I think a lot of the critiques that you're hearing about renewable energy are taking some of the amazing critiques that have been lobbied against the oil and gas industry for decades now and just directly applying them, and they don't work. So it's a hard question to answer because you have to get to the back. So I'd say a couple key differences. Renewable energy projects are deals between private landowners and private developers. So unlike oil and gas, where the farmer has no ability to say no to a project, they don't get asked if they want the project on there. A renewable energy project actually has to negotiate with that landowner. So already the Alberta government has reclamation rules that they updated in 2018 that are stronger than they are for the oil and gas industry. They built off of those for the renewable energy industry, as well as most of major developers already include reclamation clauses in their contracts. And again, as a private deal, any landowner can ask for that to be included in the contract. So that's how reclamation is handled in the renewable energy industry. I'd also say there's a difference between the actual resource that we're talking about. So throughout the life of that renewable energy project, there's multiple opportunities to repower the project, as it said. So you bring in new components, you increase its capacity, and you basically, as like a blade wears out on a wind turbine, you replace it with newer components. The other thing that even at the end of that full lifespan, let's say when the wind, the concrete of the actual pad needs to be replaced, you need to do something, that resource isn't gone. It's not like a depleted well where at the end of its life, there's no viable or economical resource to produce. And in fact, when you're looking at it, the resource could be considered more valuable at the end of life for a wind or solar project, because you have 30 years of data on what its generation capacity is going to be. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. And so the question of reclamation, I think, is less tricky in the renewable energy industry than it is in oil and gas because of some of those differences.
So if I understand this correctly, essentially these could go on indefinitely, because if you need to replace a solar panel, or you need to replace the pad under it, you do that. If you need to replace a wind turbine blade, you do that. Or you maybe replace the whole turbine because they're becoming so much bigger. But there's this boogeyman of solar panels winding up and wind turbines winding up in landfills. And maybe can we lay that one to rest, that in fact there is a recycling industry beginning for solar panels and wind turbines?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be fair and say that it's just in its infancy, recycling. I know there are some issues in the States with companies that started to stockpile material a little early before they had the actual facilities up and running. But then I think that you can look at examples here in Alberta. We have a blog coming out next month that looks at a company that's looking at recycling solar panels. And again, I think that a difference there is the amount of valuable material that's in both wind turbines and solar panels changes the equation. And you know, when you look at like the Department of Energy out of the States has some good analysis of what the cost of decommissioning a turbine. So pretending that we don't want to put a new one up, the actual end of life cost, once you account for the salvage, is between $67,000 and $100,000 US. And that's a lot of that has to do with how much you get back off the salvage material.
Gotcha. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about was municipal land use. Okay, we already know now that, you know, this is a developer to a farmer, or sorry, a landowner transaction. It's between two private parties, but there are municipal land use issues that come up, and I see in the requirements, you know, they're requiring the developer to comply with applicable municipal planning documents, land use bylaws, and other municipal bylaws. I would have thought that that would be part of the original contract. I mean, that just is, again, standard operating procedure.
Yeah, that is standard operating procedure, and municipalities are free to look at their land use plans and decide where they would or would not like projects. I think it's important to point out, though, how many Alberta municipalities and counties are making significant tax revenue off of these projects, right?
Right. Okay, so to wrap up our conversation, Jorden, my impression on this is that the moratorium threw the renewables industry into, you know, very disrupted it, and now it's, you know, projects have been stopped, and there's a question about whether or not developers and investors will come back. I mean, it's very, very uncertain future. And then on top of it, the AUC, which, you know, is the regulator here, you would think would come in and try to smooth the waters and make things less confusing, less uncertain. It seems to have done the exact opposite. And now what was confusing is now just more confusing. How do we resolve this thing? What should Alberta do?
Yeah, so first ask still is the government should remove the moratorium. It's done through an order in council. If that order is removed or rescinded, we're good to keep moving forward through a normal regulatory process. I want to be clear. I do think this conversation needs to happen. Barring that, the AUC still hasn't released its full terms of the inquiry. So, and that is going to be really the industry's chance to engage on these issues and to put our side of this forward and really hear what stakeholders on the other side have to say and what their concerns truly are. I think part of the problem right now is we don't actually understand really what the concerns are. They keep changing. They or get put out in very vague terms that kind of hint at where we might be going. So what we're really asking for is for the AUC to finalize their inquiry process, to release that. And like yesterday, when they release information and interim requirements, to not leave giant questions in any release. Like, so instead of saying may apply to these projects, outline the criteria of the projects that are going to have these applied to them, right? I think that they just need to, I applaud them for moving quickly, as they were asked to do this review, you know, and we've seen every 2 weeks they've had a new announcement moving it forward, and I applaud them on that. I think that it's time, though, to take a pause, look at what information is needed, and release it all so that we can get into the actual inquiry and have a fulsome discussion. As you said, right now, it just seems to be a questions on questions.
Well, Jorden, thank you very much for this. I really appreciate your insights. You've illuminated some of the issues here. We'll see whether if the government and the AUC come up with any solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.